Coming up on this episode of Prop IQ, we look at auctions. When should you use them to sell and what's the process? We'll get some first-hand experience from a property owner who recently sold at an auction. We'll hear from our Auctioneer of the Year, David Holmes, and Kaytlin Ezzy from CoreLogic will join me in the studio to go through the stats that matter when it comes to auctions. This is Prop IQ. Hello and welcome to Prop IQ, a show produced by the REIQ to provide insights into real estate and property for real estate agents and consumers alike. I'm Antonia Mercarella, CEO of the REIQ, and I'm really glad you've joined me for this series where we take a deep dive into the latest trends, news and insights in the real estate industry. Our last episode was all about the rental market, where we looked at the roles and responsibilities of tenants, property managers and investors. We heard from Michael Gapes from Cardinal Lawyers about the legal obligations for investors, and we also got a perspective from a renter. Plus, Clint Dowdle-Smith spoke to us about the role of property managers. If you'd like to check out our rental market episode, it's now available to watch on demand at any time. Just go to reiq.com and click on Prop IQ. And don't forget, we love hearing from you. So if you're watching, please jump in the chat, make plenty of comments, and of course, ask lots of questions. This episode is all about auctions. Auctions can be an effective and exciting way to buy and sell property. And since 2020, we've seen the number of properties sold at auction in Queensland on the rise. This is partly due to the impact of COVID-19 and the highly competitive conditions we've seen building in Queensland over several years now. From a seller's perspective, auctions offer an opportunity to sell within a compressed marketing time frame and to create a high level of competitiveness by attracting serious buyers at the same time in one place. This competitive environment can result in a quicker sale at a premium price. Meanwhile, auctions give buyers higher confidence in the value of the property because they're seeing others bidding in a transparent and public way. When buying at auction, it's important to understand some unique characteristics about them. If you are the highest bidder at an auction when the hammer falls, you will usually be required to enter into a contract to buy the property immediately. Auction contracts are almost always unconditional. This means you cannot ask for conditions such as subject to finance and subject to pest and building reports. Also, if you buy at auction, there is no cooling off period. So if you change your mind, you generally can't walk away from the contract without contractual or financial consequences. So before you bid at an auction, you should always make sure you inspect the property, research the market to determine the value of the property, get your finance pre-approved and do all your due diligence like pest and building reports. Also, you should obtain a copy of the contract and if necessary, seek legal advice about the terms in case you are the successful bidder. You should also confirm the settlement terms the vendor is seeking and how much deposit they will require. This can be up to 10% of the purchase price. On this episode, we will help you to understand the auction process in more detail. And to help you do that, we sat down with David Holmes, the reigning REIQ Auctioneer of the Year. David is a long-term auctioneer who is one of the most popular auctioneers in our state. And we also met Colleen Simpson, who recently sold at auction, who shared her auction experience with us.
David Holmes, owner of Holmes Auctions and auctioneer. Final chance, we are sold, congratulations, well bought. When the hammer falls on the day, job's done, we move on. So what's the best property to send to auction? We believe that every property has the opportunity or the ability to go to auction. But if you're thinking about properties that are highly desirable, so if we think about the mum and dad investor market and first home buyers, let's call that 3 or 4 bedroom, 2 bath, 2 car accommodation properties that are, bread and butter every day of the week. Those properties should absolutely go to auction. There's always going to be numerous buyers for it.
Well, we had decided to buy a unit off the plan in Dutton Park, and it had come to the time where we had to make the final payments for that, and we decided this unit has served us really well for quite a number of years with our family. Let's sell it and use that to put into the new investment. We were just going to put it up for sale. It had been a long time since something had been sold in that block of units, so why not see what the market would be like and have a few open houses and go to auction.
The benefits of selling at auction are wide and varied, and it depends on everyone's circumstances, but there's a couple of key benefits that are for everybody. So for a seller, it's great because you have a clearly defined timeline. Secondly, you get an unconditional contract. So again, we mentioned that earlier, no builders, no buyer's inspection clause, so we don't have to wait for someone to say, well, I'll buy it once I've checked with the builder and the pest guy. It puts the whole control of the transaction back in their hands.
Would I consider again? Yes, I think I definitely would. It's worth going to auction.
Seller wants to sell, agent wants to sell, auctioneer wants to sell, buyer wants to buy.
We wanted to be there for the auction because I've never been present at an auction where I'm the seller.
Why are buyers scared of auctions? They shouldn't be, really. Again, as a buyer, I would be more afraid of turning up to a property where it was expressions of interest, or where there was a price on and I'm now in a multiple offer situation. And the reason I'd be scared of that is I'm dealing with an agent who's telling me I need to increase my offer. I can't see what the other offers are, whereas at an auction, it's transparent. It's happening in front of you. You can stand there, mano a mano, eyeball to eyeball, with another buyer.
You never know what the market's going to do, really. You can surmise, you can guess, you can look at previous sales, you can talk to local people who have sold, but you don't really know till that day of the auction who's going to come. And even if a complete wild card comes in, has heard about the interest and decides, I'm going to have a go. It was a win-win for all of us, and they were very happy, and it's a bit of fun too.
We believe the auction process does everything inside of it that every other process offers, but it actually takes away the conditions.
And then we came over to the unit and met the people who'd bought it.
When the hammer falls, the property is sold.
But it was really nice, yeah, great positive experience.
Money's in the bank 30 days or whenever the settlement date's set down. Deposit has to be paid on the day.
Third, last chance, selling, we are sold. Well bought, nicely played, guys.
Kaytlin Ezzy is an economist with CoreLogic. CoreLogic is Australia's leading property data provider. Kaytlin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. We have seen an uptick in the number of properties being sold at auction. Does the data support that?
Yeah, so looking over the past couple of years, auction activity across the broader Brisbane region has averaged between sort of 140 to 230 auctions, fluctuating through different times of the year. So peaking in as we lead up to Easter, cooling off throughout winter, and then peaking again towards the end of the year. Now, over the past couple of years, we have seen a little bit of an uptick in the proportion of properties taken to auction. So taking a slice of auction activity over overall sales, historically has sat at around the 6% mark. But throughout that COVID surge through 2021 and 2022, it reached around sort of that 7 to 8% mark. It is easing off a little bit, back to around that about 7% mark. But we are seeing a few extra auctions every week compared to historical averages.
And how many properties would you say are selling at auction in Queensland?
So from the properties taken to auction, the weekly clearance rate across Brisbane has averaged around 55% over the past sort of 5 years or so. Over the past the past 3 months, the beginning of the year, we have actually seen that rise to an average of around 65%. So we are seeing a bit of early year exuberance that isn't what we were expecting to see. This sort of time last year, so the end of last year, auction clearance rates across Brisbane were sitting around that 50% range. So a bit better than what we were expecting to see coming into the year. If we zoom back and look at post-auction success though, when you look at properties that have sold within 8 weeks of, say, a failed auction, that success rate does jump up to around the 80% mark. And if taken another step back to that 16 weeks post-auction to about the 85% mark.
Yeah, because sometimes I think we measure the success of an auction through if there is a successful bidder on the day. But what we know is that sometimes it won't sell at the auction, but it sells quite quickly thereafter.
Yeah, and given that the auction campaign tends to be quite concentrated, quite targeted, we like to think of that as a successful auction result because it did sell as a result of that campaign.
And in terms of the success rate of auction sales in Queensland, how do we compare with the rest of the country?
So looking across some of the other major capitals, so markets like Sydney and Melbourne, they tend to see a higher proportion of properties taken to auction, so between sort of 20 and 25%. So Sydney's auction clearance rate is typically held around sort of the 65 to 70% mark. Melbourne's around that sort of 65% mark over the past couple of months. So they are seeing more properties sort of sold under the hammer, and that might be because of a sort of more broader cultural acceptance of auctions. We tend to be in Queensland a fairly private treaty heavy market. That's what buyers tend to know, and so we do see Brisbane record a lower clearance rate compared to, say, Melbourne or Sydney, but so far this year Brisbane is tracking in line with Melbourne.
Yeah, that's good to hear. We know that Sydney and Melbourne tend to be more traditional auction markets, but I think there is a degree of familiarity that's starting to emerge here in Queensland. And Kaytlin, I have to ask you the question that is on everyone's lips when it comes to an auction, and that is, do we see any evidence that going to auction helps you to achieve a higher selling price on the day?
Yeah, we do. So looking at historical median sales price for overall sales across broader Brisbane compared to the median sales price of an auction sale, it does typically tend to track around 50% higher. So if the median sales price across Brisbane is $750,000, then your auction median sale is probably about $1.1 million. So there's a couple of reasons for that. Obviously, being at an auction, you have a much higher chance of getting the best possible price for a property as people put forward their best possible offer, but also the type of properties that tend to go to auction. So it tends to be your more premium markets, your more lifestyle properties that go under the hammer, and they naturally fetch a higher price.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of the auction process. It creates a very competitive market. If you've got at least two people wanting to secure it, we've all seen what can happen. And of course, the other question that we have, you are CoreLogic, the leading data provider here in Queensland when it comes to property. So tell us, what kind of research should someone do before going to an auction, and what should they be thinking about in preparation for that experience?
Yeah, so first and foremost, obviously getting your finances in order. The auction is an unconditional sale, so there's no subject to finance clauses, and often a fairly substantial deposit is required on the day or in the next business day. Outside of making sure that you're ready to bid and know what your upper limits are, understanding what's happening in the broader market. So CoreLogic has a really great free interactive tool called Mapping the Market, which looks at around 4,000 different suburbs, house and unit prices across the country. So you can see what the median house or median unit value for that market is doing, as well as values more broadly, keeping in mind that obviously an auction is going to come in at that upper cusp of those prices. and also understanding what's happening in the broader monetary and property market. So we have a lot of great research on our CoreLogic news webpage, so on the news tab at corelogic.com.
Yeah, that's great, because I know a lot of people feel very fearful about what they should offer. So I think doing your research on the value of the property is absolutely of key importance. And just finally, get your crystal ball out. Tell us a little bit about what you're predicting for the future of the Queensland property market.
Yeah, so the Queensland market is still seeing quite strong value growth. So on the 3 months to February, values across Brisbane rose but just under 3%, around 2% across the broader regional market, which when you compare to markets like Sydney and Melbourne, is really quite a strong growth for the past 3 months. That has eased off a little bit from the growth we were seeing in the middle of last year. Arguably because the affordability advantage that Queensland has traditionally offered has been eroded thanks to that strong growth. But we are still seeing quite strong growth moving forward.
I think it's really important to keep in mind that phenomenal accelerated growth we experienced in that COVID period. So of course, it's understandable that we're now seeing perhaps more modest movements. So thanks so much for that great information, Kaytlin.
Thanks for having me.
As we've seen, there's lots of benefits associated with selling at auction. A good working relationship between vendor, agent and auctioneer is of key importance for the best outcome. And as a buyer, you need to make sure you understand the process before going to bid at an auction. As always, look to use an REIQ affiliated auctioneer. This is the part of the show where we want to hear from you. If you have a question about auctions, make sure you comment so we can help you out. In the meantime, we've had some viewers submit some video questions. Let's take a look.
Hi Antonia, my question is, why can't I see a price or a price guide of auction properties in Queensland? I see price guides are given to other parts of Australia.
This is a great question. Here in Queensland, strict laws prevent a real estate agent from giving a price or a price guide if the property is earmarked to go to auction. It is permissible in some other jurisdictions in Australia, but it's not lawful to do this in Queensland. As an interested buyer, you can ask an agent to give you a comparative market analysis, and they may choose to do so, but that will be subject to the instructions of the vendor. Now, let's go to our next question.
Hi Prop IQ. My question is, if I'm the highest bidder at an auction, do I have to buy the property or can I change my mind afterwards?
Well, the answer to this question will depend on the terms governing the auction, but as a general rule, if you are the highest bidder at an auction and the auctioneer puts the hammer down on your bid, then yes, you will be bound to purchase that property and enter into a contract immediately. So don't be tempted to bid unless you're very serious about buying the property. All right, it's time for our next question.
Hi Prop IQ. My question is, I'm actually worried to bid at an auction, so can I get someone else to bid for me, and what can I do to make sure I don't pay too much?
Well, lots of people feel very anxious about bidding at an auction. So if you feel like you can't hold your nerve to do so, which is understandable, you can ask someone to bid on your behalf. You could, for example, engage a buyer's agent to go and act on your behalf at the auction, or perhaps a trusted friend or colleague. But remember, when you're doing so, that you'll need to do that in writing, and you'll need to let them know what the maximum price is you're prepared to pay, and you need to make sure that you are happy with the terms of the contract first. Let's have a look at our final question.
Hi Prop IQ. My question is, how do I know that other bidders at the auction are legitimate and I'm not bidding against fake bidders?
We often hear people asking this question, but it's important to understand that in Queensland, very strict laws govern auctions and dummy bidding is absolutely unlawful, and there are strict and severe penalties that apply if an agent or an auctioneer is found to be engaging in this type of unlawful conduct. Some great questions in there, so thanks for taking the time to submit them. And don't forget, if you've got other questions or feedback, make sure you comment so we can respond to you. And if you'd like to be part of our Q&A segment or appear on our show, make sure you follow us on social media and keep an eye out for the topic of our next episode, which will be posted on our Facebook and Instagram accounts. And it will have the links and instructions on how you can submit your own video. And a final reminder, please remember to seek your own independent legal advice when purchasing a property. Every property transaction is unique, so the answers and information provided today are general advice only. You should always seek independent legal advice that is tailored to your needs and circumstances. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Prop IQ. I hope you found it informative. We appreciate you tuning in and joining us on Facebook Live. To tune in to our next episode, be sure to follow us on social media and make sure you subscribe to the REIQ What's On newsletter at reiq.com/what's on. See you next time.